Then they get to the final, and this isn't as relevant to the randomizer because obviously Fnatic actually chose to pick Cobblestone because they'd played Cobblestone earlier and won, and then they were in a situation where they went against, they decided to pick it for their own reasons here. But just in terms of it making the match not as good, we had NIP just getting to cheese out Fnatic on Cobblestone, again winning a narrow match, because again, no teams really know how to play it. And so I kind of sucked to watch NIP just cheesing teams out, because one of the maps that they won in each of the 3 series was on Cobblestone, which was terrible Counter-Strike, quite frankly. It wasn't good from them. And so the fact that they essentially won their title by cheesing on Cobblestone and getting these map wins on a map that no one had really played kind of sucks, which then we have to add in is another reason why this event sucked, because it was an event where Valve forced 2 brand new, untested and broken maps, Cobblestone and Overpass, onto the scene, and as a result lowered the quality of play at the tournament and meant people couldn't have prepared properly, couldn't have been fully in match form, not least because they'd never played an official offline tournament on these maps. Like, you have to remember, Cobblestone and Overpass now are considered classic maps. Like, Overpass now I think is the best map personally, after it was reworked in, like, I think it was like February of 2015. Cobblestone I think became a very good map for 2015. In 2016 I thought it was starting to get a bit played out and get a bit stale, and there were some issues with it. Although they actually did help things, I think, by adding that little set of steps at the A site. Not the B site, obviously. And but at the time, the unreworked versions were terrible. And that's why I actually think these matches here at this major sucked, where NIP was just playing it all the time. And I think if you go and watch the Overpass game that LDLC and NIP played as the deciding map in the final, which was using the randomizer as well, of DreamHack Winter 2014, the next major after this, I think that sucked as well. It was people just playing inside the sites and waiting for the terrorists to come to the site because the maps were different. So shit maps that no one's ever played before is egregious and obviously doesn't affect any other major in that respect. So I think that was a terrible factor and really limited this major, combined with the format, combined with who qualified and these components, and then the best of ones in the group stage, meaning you don't get necessarily the best playoff bracket. We didn't have a best of 3 decider. Now, one of the things I used to love about the early CSGO majors, especially once we had the LAN qualifier, and the LAN qualifier wasn't based on region, but you fed into it eventually when you got the minors later, is that it made it so that you just got the best teams at the major largely. And sometimes that meant teams you wouldn't have thought, like you got Fallen's Kaboom squad qualified over some teams like Dignitas that you would have thought were better. You get some good squads, Vega Squadron in recent years, who qualify over some of the other teams. Whereas now, in a world where Europe's so hard and so difficult qualification-wise, meanwhile, regions like Asia are piss easy to get through, CIS minor, you end up with a scenario where you're not necessarily going to get the best teams there, because the team's going to come out of the CIS minor who's probably not as good as some of the teams who didn't even make it out of the EU minor. You're going to have teams who come out of the Asian minor, especially in past years, admittedly maybe not this one, who would be much worse than the teams that might not make it out the NA and the EU minor. So there are issues here in terms of the qualification mode. Now let's look at the shit teams, because that's another problem, right? You have teams like Quantum Bellator Fire, already discussed, they're already at the major. They've done nothing. Vega Squadron, not only have they done very little since the last major, they've even lost their best player. They're in a scenario where if someone was inviting a team, you'd never invite them. They've done nothing. If you had a circuit point system, they would never make it. Meanwhile, NRG over in North America, team who was in the final of Star Ladder International Tournament, team that was top 4 at ECS Season 5 International Tournament, they're playing in the minor. Again, what? They're not a better team. They haven't accomplished more in the last few months than Quantum Bellator Fire and Vega Squad. Is there anyone who would dispute that? Again, people will always say, but if you're using invites and these systems, who determines these things? Well, I don't know a human being in the world who would claim that Vega Squadron and Quantum Bellator Fire have done more since the last major than NRG has. On Twitter, Rugger, former coach of North Dignitas, now of Optic Gaming, said, so rules were changed despite it being outlined multiple times that a player would be locked after minor registration. This is very odd and smells of networking/relationship between Faceit and a large organization. This is a rule change within the last week, by the way. Now, what's interesting is this is after the EU minor has been played. Now, when he says there, the part about, he says that, it had been outlined multiple times that the players would be locked after registering for the minor. Never mind, you could play the minor and then still take a player up to the majors. He then also says this part here about
smells of network/relationship between FACEIT and a large organization. Now, this is pure speculation on my part to think what large organization could want a rule change like this to take place. And actually, after the minor, when they then know that it's something they'd want to do, well, here's a very obvious one. Everyone knows that Virtus.pro doesn't have a set 5-man lineup. They were using this guy called Morals as a stand-in. It wasn't going well. He wasn't playing well. And everyone knew behind the scenes they're probably going to try and get a player from AGO, well, technically the best Polish team, but the other top Polish team within the region. Well, what do you know? AGO did an NRG themselves. They didn't manage to get out of the EU minor. It wasn't as bad for them as it was to NRG. They didn't get out of the EU minor. In fact, I don't think they even qualified for the EU minor. I think they lost in the closed qualifier. So actually, that's a perfect example of if Virtus.pro wants players and they want a player for the major, and AGO isn't at the major anyway, and this rule exists, they can now sign an AGO player, as Virtus.pro since has, signing Snatchy, and he can play with them at the major. That's very different to the past, and I'm sure a lot of other teams would like to have known that, as Rugger implies here. So, now this is very weird behavior, because this particular change, have been a total net positive for FACEIT. This should have been a huge PR win for their first ever major that would have made the community love them even more. Because this is a change players wanted. This is a change fans wanted. This is a change players and fans have actually petitioned for. Remember all those threads coming up around the last major about we've got to change this. Like the major's not going to mean as much if we don't allow SK to play with bolts. Guardian even did an interview like, it won't mean as much to win a major if SK doesn't have their full lineup because they were considered the best team at the time and obviously beaten FaZe a bunch of times in big matches. So this is a move where if FACEIT had just come out and done a tweet before the minor began, by the way, we've updated the eligibility rules. Now, players who play at the minor are also eligible to play for other teams at the major. This would have been a huge PR win for them. Players would be thanking them. The fans would be happy. They would even also have shown themselves so competent that they'd been able to negotiate with Valve and get Valve to let them change that specific rule, something notoriously hard to do. I've known many tournament organizers who held majors, and I suggested changes to them. They agreed with the change, thought, that makes a lot of sense, Thorin. Went to Valve, and Valve was like, no, I don't want to change that. I don't want to allow you to seed a tournament that way or to have that kind of a playoff bracket. And they had to come back and say, sorry, I have to scrap it. I can't do any of that. Actually, Valve won't let us. So if this should have been this massive win, their claim here is that they just didn't know it was needed. And, everyone can just interpret themselves from the rule book. But that's it. Why is it hidden away? Why is it treated as though they didn't want most people to hear about it or as though they're ashamed of it? That's what makes it seem sketchy, right? Because it wouldn't have been publicized if it wasn't for Rugger's tweet. No one maybe would know even now.
To the actual problems of the major. So week 1 of the major, what used to be the major qualifier, was a fucking joke. There was tech issues up the arse to an extent I've actually never seen at a major before, at least in CSGO. First of all, you had the FPS issues. People, even as week 2 was starting, were saying about how they're having problems with the PCs and how did they get them to get max FPS and get them to get an FPS that was at a level that was appropriate for a big tournament, the World Championship, something that's going to define people's legacies. Then you had the whole thing where there was this bug where some players in a server, all of their footsteps wouldn't go through. So if you were hiding behind a box or behind a wall and you heard some footsteps, perhaps the guy was actually already there and you thought he was further away based on the footsteps. Perhaps you heard no footsteps at all and the opponent might think he did and think that you're going to have a fair fight with them, but you're surprised. Or maybe somehow he knows that he doesn't have footsteps or he's not hearing your footsteps. A whole scenario. This was a huge issue and this is a nightmare scenario because that will potentially affect the outcome of matches. There are going to be matches that are going to be 16-14s and are going to be 16-13s. That 1 or 2 rounds changes who wins that game. And if you have an issue like this, I think it's pretty legit actually for players to complain. That is not the environment in which you should be playing the game because it's not even just that there is something busted. Like this wasn't even busted fairly for each team. It's not like everyone got exactly the same amount or happened at the same exact times. This was almost an arbitrary element to it, a part that nobody could know about. And so it was actually one of the bigger issues I've heard of in a tournament. So when someone like MSL and North complains, it's actually legitimate. I mean, They're, especially a team like theirs, by the way, a very tactical team, a team trying to play off team play and make reads on the opponent. If you're a team like Vegas Squad, maybe it's not as big a deal for you. In fact, maybe it could benefit you if you're rushing through smokes and playing very aggressively, taking lots of aim duels, just swarming people with your guns, right? You might not need it as much. So there are certain teams that might benefit from this, and there are certain teams that it's fairly obvious would potentially take a hit in terms of their particular strengths. So yes, it is a problem that we have something like this going on. And all of the many factors that weren't in Facet's control, and quite frankly, were the ultimate factors that decided that the majors sucked. So actually, most of why the majors sucked wasn't Facet's fault. Because first of all, I think whoever determined when this major was held fucked up massively, but in a way we've never tried before. And so I don't 100% blame them, but I could have guessed some of this personally. And now that it's happened, yeah, I'm not a fan. So first of all, it was held after the player break. So people, it's not just that they had a break from being at tournaments, people literally were on holiday. You can go on their Instagrams and see them in fucking Mauritius and the Maldives, and they're on fucking beaches, sipping out of highball glasses or whatever, and having fucking orange juice and watching a girl with her ass out in a bikini. They weren't thinking about Counter-Strike, they weren't playing Counter-Strike, they weren't preparing for a major, and so as a result, you've let everyone's form get broken, ruined, taken to a lower level, and then they come back after their holiday. Some of them had tournaments, like MIBR went to Zortak, a small tournament. It actually had a lot of money, but in terms of prestige, then a number of teams had DreamHack Stockholm. Okay, one tournament to warm you up and then go straight into another tournament. What we saw was this wasn't enough. This player break should have been held after the major. The major should have put the capper on the season of Counter-Strike and all the big tournaments, and therefore Na'Vi and Astralis and all these teams should have come in peak form to the major, played the major, then everyone goes on holiday. Then people can make roster moves and people can let their form break and they can start over in the season. And you know what? Go ahead and throw in. Why not put the new map after the player break? Why have it so that we have a scenario like we had where it just comes halfway through the season, seemingly at times.
Let's be real, there's a lot of TOs I can't work with now, some of them through my own choice, and there's plenty of places I don't want to, or, I mean, actually I could go to all these places, so I guess I don't want to go to these places. As an aside, there's obviously going to be the angle that plebs are just going to go, yeah, you just weren't going to get hired. Like, that's patently false. I've shown in this video here, no one disputes any of my claims was legit. I could actually prove half of this stuff with the receipts if I had to. I won't, by the way, because none of your fucking business, and who are you to make false claims that I have to somehow jump through hoops for? Then also, how about things like, even after I said all that stuff about the Pro League slots and all of that, ESL still came on by the numbers on the episode I didn't appear on, and basically told Richard straight up, like, they have no problems working with me, they would work with me at events again. Basically, it was my prerogative as to whether that was the case or not. Interesting, isn't it? I've already said I had offers from PGL, I've turned down. Thing is, haters like that don't care, guys, if it's true or false. If it's false and they thought it was true, they still hate you anyway. They're basically just saying it to express that they dislike you and to be shitty to you, to try and hurt your feelings, to try and fuck with you. You aren't wanted. Like, that's all it is. So I'm not playing that game at all. If they think I wasn't hired and it's all lies, then so be it. Go ahead and write your shitty little comments. I'll just keep living my life, doing world championships, making millions of dollars, killing the game, doing all things you claim I can't do, with all the players you think hate me, who are actually friends of mine behind the scenes who respect me. And yeah, it'll just suck for you that your little optics world will remain how it is, and my real life will be awesome. I was never anywhere close to my main gig being an on-camera broadcast talent analyst. It was always at most half of my work in terms of money or in terms of days of the year worked. By the way, in the early days, it was way less than half because the day rates were so small. An entire event might be €800 for the whole event. So that was nowhere close to what I was making for my other jobs and my journalism and the rest of it. Then my journalism has got to the point where I can make enormous amounts of money and all my freelance at my own leisure, work for all these people, bidding wars between them. I've got videos, I've got talk shows, I've got other channels, I've got companies, I've got written content, I've got, they're ghostwriting people what for the events, write narrative things for them. Teams want to work with you, have you help write there's an unlimited amount of work. I don't have to do these gigs if I don't want to, and I never had to. So to me, yeah, the day rate's great. It's great getting like 1,000 or more than 1,000 per day. Yeah, it sounds awesome, right? Wow, if I make that, think how much I'm making per year. The problem becomes, and every talent realizes this eventually, it's just the day rate though. If you don't work, you don't get the money. So that means those days, at least for most of the history, all you can do is that event. You can't do something else as well. So yeah, you're making 1,000 that day or 1,200 or 1,400, but you can't do anything else on that day to make yourself elsewhere money. So you're always reliant on the TO, you're always reliant on this life, And it's hard to go anywhere further. And if they miss you out for the events, you can see why it's so dangerous to hitch your sail to that mast, as it were. So going to be spoiled by this, I'm telling you right now. People will just look at absolute number of rings, titles, majors won, and they won't care about the other context. They won't care about how long essentially, people like Nico and Simple were playing on nightmare mode. And by that logic, like Prodax, Snacks, Get-Right, were playing on easy mode. Now, it's still hard to win a major, but you see what I mean? In terms of the number of chances they had. So, to me, it's actually nonsense, this whole thing. It's actually spoiling CS history. I know some of the reasons why. I know certain things like 2020 and part of 2021 were maybe out of Valve's control. Not entirely. And quite frankly, how do you even take that position now? Knowing, by the way, that essentially a lot of things were nonsense. And if you ever looked into it, there was always places you could have potentially gone, things you could have done. Like the idea, by the way, it's just because of that you only had 4 in 4 years. That only affected like a year and a half. That didn't even affect this last couple of periods. That definitely doesn't affect this year. And also, spoiler, in spring of 2021, you could have just held a major in certain countries. There were certain countries people were going to for boot camps. You could have had a major there. And obviously, that doesn't apply at all to this year. Minus if it was going to be held in the US or China, who have their own things that we're not supposed to talk about as to why you can't have the major. So unfortunately, I do think this puts a dampener on CS history when you compare rings and you try and have the GOAT debate. People aren't going to do a very good job factoring this in, I'll tell you right now. And they're going to act like Fnatic and the Astralis guys are just unbeatable, and people like Simple just do, well, why didn't they get as many rings? Like, they didn't even have the chance at them. And also, it's an inhuman thing to ask someone to be like the absolute best for like 6 or 7 years when you had to be the absolute best for like 2 or 3 or 1.5 sometimes. That just seems cruel and unusual punishment. The most about this is the impact it's going to have on people's careers. Because people look at majors like they look at rings and titles in sports like basketball and NFL, also team sports. Imagine if some years in the NFL or NBA, and some fans didn't know this, there had somehow been 2 or 3 NFL titles that you could have won in a year back in time, but then now you can only win 1 or 0 in certain years. But then no one knows that was the distribution. So they argue like, right, well, Montana had 4 rings and you only have 1 ring. But it's like, but I only had a chance at 3 though, and he played in many. And it'd be like, that would be unfair as fuck, wouldn't it? Like, you'd be like, what the hell? Now, when your career was, when you actually had your career in CS, when your prime was, when you had a good team, now become enormous factors in how many majors you can win and how many it's reasonable to judge your career a success or a failure on based on the number of majors you won. People, by the way, barely consider those factors when even having normal GOAT/great player debates. But this means before we can even get into the names, we can automatically say conclusively, aside from prize money, being around earlier in your career in your prime and your best teams was way better for your chances to stack CSGO majors. Like if you look back here, if you'd played your prime only from 2012 to 2015, start of the game, there wasn't even one for the first year, and then till the end of 2015, yeah, it sucks that you lost that first year and you didn't get as much money. You had a crack at 9 majors in 3.5 years. Meanwhile, if you'd played 2016 to 2019, 4 years, you got more prize money, but you only had a crack at 8 majors in 4 years. I just said the others got a crack at 9 majors in 3.5 years. Then if you'd played 2020 in your prime and best teams to 2023, the last major, you would have had a chance at 4 majors in 4 years. That's obviously going to massively affect how we judge the great play. Now, you know you never catch me dolo online because I'm rolling deep and we dem boys. Who am I talking about? The Skrilluminati. So this video and the content on my channel is kindly supported by Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Thorin, Jensen Goh, Nicky, Jasun. You know who my second in command is, JerCkysMiNi0n. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my content? Would you like to ask me a question in an AMA? Do you want to take part in one of those lengthy discussions where you get to set the topic? Maybe you want to see who upcoming guests are in my interviews and on my talk shows. Well, all of these perks and more are available to you if you put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today. How? Via the Patreon link in the description box below.